All right. Welcome back to Friday, everybody. I am continuing my work on this Charles Bradley painting. If you're not familiar with him, do a Google or YouTube search. Really awesome soul music. So I'm going to continue talking about while I work on this painting. Continue talking about how I kind of navigated the being an artist, making a living off your art pathway. Last week I left excuse me, I left off with a story about going to New York to do a trade show, the New York Art Expo. This is like in 2005, and the idea was to get maybe some publishing deals or some gallery representation or something. I knew that there was things that happened there if you get there, and I feel like that was a place I could make a big break. And I had kind of been given some confidence in doing that by some previous good fortune selling it at a festival in Beverly Hills where I sold nearly everything in my booth and I made more money than I'd ever made at a weekend show. And the scary part about doing that show was that the booth cost like $300 or $400 at the time, and that was a lot of money for me. It was like that was about as much as I would make in a day. So, I was taking a risk that if I spent as much money as I normally make, that it might be worth it. So that was the gambit, and it did pay off. So I had that sort of boost in confidence, and like I just need the right venue and getting in front of the right audience for this. That's what's going to really be what helps, kind of take whatever I was doing to the next level, in my mind. Sure. So I'm trying to find the right brush here. So the success I had in Beverly Hills was in the spring of 2004, and I was super stoked. They had this show twice a year, once in like April or May, and once in October. And so I'd applied for the show in October. I was really excited. I was gonna go back, and that was going to get me the money I needed to buy this $5,000 booth space in New York. So I sent my application for the Beverly Hills Affair in a Garden show, and then I get the letter in the mail informing me that they regret to inform me that I was not selected for the show in October, and I was like crestfallen, like, oh man, I was like, I did so well there before. How could they do this to me? I was counting on this, just getting, and so I was running into some of the first headaches of some of these doing these events was that there's still something else you're dealing with and struggling against, I guess, and that is that you have to get through this jury process. So you have to you have somebody else that's not necessarily somebody, but something that's keeping you from just doing what you want to do. Not that there's a keeping, but there's always some sort of obstacle. Like there's at least my experience. So I didn't get into the show, and then I ended up. I was still determined. I'm going to New York anyway. I'm going to do this show, and I'm going to get out of Venice Beach because that's getting to be such a hassle and a drain on me mentally and just psychologically. I was wanting to do bigger and better things, as I guess everybody does in their 20s. And so I ended up borrowing money from my parents and from my friend Jay, and we, I just it's like I knew if I just got to New York, I'll be able to pay you back. I told a story about borrowing some money from my parents to get a printer early on, and I paid them back within a month. So I was like, I was pretty good about paying back, and I just had this overconfidence, I think. Well, I don't know. It didn't know what it was. I was overconfident, probably. It was delusional, but it was just the experience I had at the Beverly Hills show, and I knew that if I got there, it would pay off for me. So, anyways, that was the gambit, and I was by the time I got done with the show and all the expenses for framing and shipping the work and paying union people to do all the lights and hang up stuff, like there ended up being all these extra costs I didn't really anticipate, and I had maxed out all of my credit cards and borrowed extra money on top of it, and everything I had was put into this one endeavor, and it failed miserably. I didn't get any new big accounts or anything. I didn't make a bunch of sales. I didn't sell almost sold nothing. And one of the big hassles of that was I had to get everything to fit back in this crate of artwork that I had shipped to me, and it was all packed like a Tetris puzzle. So if you got something out of in the wrong spot, you wouldn't be able to close up the crate. And and the problem that I had is that I didn't sell anything, so I had to pack it all up. And well, anyways, that was that was one of the problems. So I got it all packed up, evidently, you know. But the other problem I had is I didn't have enough money to ship the work back to me, and so a lot of what I had in my booth were paper prints that I had sleeved up and backing boards and stuff. So I took a bunch of these paper prints out of the sleeves and rolled them up, and I brought them home on suitcases back home. And I immediately the next weekend went out to Venice Beach and started selling whatever I had to make enough money to get my artwork shipped back to me, which was like about $500 or $600. So as soon as I got the money for that, I was able to get a hold of the trucking freight company for them to ship the work back to me. And once I got the work back, I was completely broke, but I had inventory. So a lot of the money that I had spent, so half of it was just for the booth space itself. The other half was to build up an inventory to sell there. And so I got my inventory back, and that was what I really needed to crawl my way back out of this hole I dug myself into. Um, and I got back. I didn't have money for my rent of my apartment. I didn't have money for rent of the studio. In fact, I thought I had money, and I had written a check to my studio landlords, and then I realized, oh, I don't have the money to cover that check, and so I had to go to them and actually convince them to loan me the money to cover the check I had written to them until after the weekend when I was able to make some money in Venice and then pay them back as soon as I got made some sales, which is what I did. So I borrowed money from my landlords to cover the check I wrote them, which was kind of funny. But they were really cool people that run that studios, so that worked out in my favor, I guess. Um, so I just spent the next, I don't know how long it was, just getting by, trying to like figure out how to get kind of back to normal. Like I had the I had like $12 to my name. Like that's all I had in cash. Like, and I would stroll down to Venice, not stroll, but get my set up there. I had nothing. I had no money, and whatever money I made was the money I come back with a couple $100 or whatever it was. So I would have to be getting a hold of the people I owed money to, with like credit cards and utilities and all this other stuff, to just try to work my way back into like some sort of like normalcy financially. And I remember my parents had offered to help me out, but I felt that was a bad idea. I was tired of it's like you can't get out of a hole by digging more hole. And I didn't want to keep owing people. I don't like owing people things. I don't like owing money. Um, so like my cell phone got shut off because I didn't have money to pay for that, and I would call them up because you could call them. I think I told the story last week. You could call them from your phone, and I would make an arrangement with them where if I paid $100 on it now, they'd turn it back on, and then in a week from then, I would pay the another amount that I knew I probably wouldn't have, but I just needed to get back on so I could function in my life until I finally did get the bill caught up. So it was always weird, stupid games, I guess. Hmm. Um, but eventually, I started kind of getting out of that, and I remember it's around. So there's some things I learned from New York too. So the one of the problems that I had is I was it was like I had the version 1.0 of what I was doing, and I was trying to go to the like the human trials or something, like I was trying to go to phase 3 trials, and I just didn't know what I was doing. Um, you know, but that's how I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't taken that chance. I wouldn't. It's like that. So that's the only way I would have figured this out. But even after I got out of doing that, I didn't know. I still didn't know what the answer was. I was just as like it just seemed like whatever was working. There's seemed to have some sort of a a shtick, a gimmick, a thing about it. As far as like you know commercial fine art, or even some of the even what you would consider uh, you know I don't know, traditional fine art. Even that has a thing about it. And I was, like I mentioned before, I was all over the place, stylistically, technical. So, like, even at my booth in New York, I had like oil paintings and some mixed media stuff, all kinds of different style, subject matters and styles. And it was not cohesive enough. And when you're dealing with people who are wanting to resell your work, they got to understand what it is, and they have to be able to get it without they're not there's not going to be time for you to give a long explanation of why they should be investing in what you're doing. They're either going to get it or they're not, and the one thing that makes it hard for them is if they don't know what they're getting from you. What is it that you do because you have 20 different things going on. Um, you don't have to have that to make a living as an artist. You don't have to have all that figured out. But if you want other people to sell your work, or you want to do illustration work or something where people are hiring you, it's usually because they're going to hire you because of a thing that you do. What it's your style, your vision, um, your characters that you do. And that's another thing I can mean by like a shtick or a gimmick is like what is your interest? What is it that that is about? What is it about your work that is you? That is basically that's what it comes down. It's like you gotta people are gonna want to know how to explain it for some reason. Like um, the presence of the work to some degree, people are going to get it or they're not. It's it sells itself to a certain degree, but when somebody's going to be trying to sell your work for you, people inevitably want to ask questions about it. So they got either have a story about you as the artist, like what like they're buying the work because you came from some weird situation and you overcame, you know, you're an immigrant or did something that you came from some really hard situation and came here and built your way up, and some sort of like crazy story, or you're a YouTuber or some you're famous already, something about you that makes the work inherently valuable because of who you are as an individual. Um, I don't really have anything like that, so I had to you know even when you're selling your work to individuals, people are going to ask what kind of style it is, which there's always these questions I don't know how to answer, like what style is this? And like, I don't know. It's just my style. Um, and you could spend time coming up with a real lengthy explanation for what your style is, but uh, I don't know. I don't do that. I think it's a waste of my time. But okay, to get back to what I was talking about is yeah. So the basic point is that anybody who's reselling your work is going to need some way of talking about it, so that in order they can sell it. So they're going to need to know something about you. They're going to need to know what your vision is, what your interest, like what it is, how you sell it. So I knew how to do that, but it was overly complicated for somebody who to like explain too many things. So basically, people who are going to be good at selling your work are going to want the easiest the work that's the easiest to sell. Like good salespeople aren't going to like take on the projects that are the most difficult. They're interested in making money, so they're going to make you know work with things that are easy to explain and easy to sell. So the ones that is that they'll have to work the least. So you got to be able to give people something that makes it easy for them to sell it. Um, and if you have 8 different styles, that is the first thing that's going to make it hard to sell it, or hard for somebody else to do that. Um, of course, there could be exceptions to this, but that's generally the sense I got from my experience in New York. And so I didn't have that, and I'd already kind of gone through this sort of struggle with trying to come up with a style altogether, and I hadn't figured it out. And I think I had enough success without figuring it out that I thought that it wasn't that important. And like, look, you don't need to do that. It's just crap people tell you. And for what I was doing, yeah, it wasn't true. I didn't need to have one specific style to sell in Venice Beach. I could make all kinds of different things and people would buy what they like. But it was true when it comes to working with other people who are wanting to sell your work or represent it. Um, yeah, people need to be easily understand what it is. So I was like, I don't know what that is for me. So at the time I was doing fantasy stuff like mermaids and fairies and sort of erotic nudes with octopus hair and floating trees and all kinds of different things. And it was fun work, and I was doing the work that I enjoyed doing. Um, so the New Yorker show was in 2005. So 2000, like 2005 and 6, I continued to do these little festivals and shows, and I was doing stuff up and down in California between, you know, music festivals and art shows and whatnot, and trying to do some more of the regular art festivals here in LA. And, you know, my display kind of sucked. I was still working on that. I got some display panels, professional panels that help help that out a bit. And I was starting to try to figure out how to make the events that I was in work just a bit better. And I wasn't really I wasn't really focused on trying to get into galleries at this point. I just went back to like, well, that didn't work. Let me make what is working work better. And I knew a lot of it had to do with presentation, and so that's what I started working on, as well as just doing the art that I enjoyed doing. And I was okay with that. It's like I wasn't, you know, like I was. It was a bummer that it didn't work out, but I learned, certainly learned a lot. But anyway, um, yeah. So I was continuing to try to get these shows, and then I eventually got into the Beverly Hills show again the following spring, and I was super stoked. I was like, finally, I'm going to dig my way out of this hole, you know. And I did the show, and it was lackluster. It was like we sold a couple of things, but it wasn't anything like the first time I did the show, and I couldn't figure out why. Like I had great work. I spent all this actually time and effort. I did a whole bunch of new work and like had a bunch of new originals, and then I sold nothing at the show. Um, so what I continued to focus on was I wanted to get out of Venice, so I continued to find, like I described before, how I viewed these venues as sort of rungs on a ladder, where the bottom rungs were like the worst, they're the most hassle, they didn't they didn't draw the right crowd for you, and you made minimal sales at those shows. So those would be the lowest rungs on the ladder, but there'd be at least some place to go if you needed to. And I would replace those rungs with the higher rung events, and that is just by doing all kinds of shows. Everything that you can, anywhere that you can find to sell your work. That's where you go. You just go anywhere that you could sell it, um, and try to focus on some of the more arty events. And a lot of cities will have their own little local art shows, and there'll be. I was doing shows like in Hermosa Beach that would have big events that would revolve around like Memorial Day and Labor Day, and that became a really good venue for me. I used to set up right in front of Sharky's there on the plaza, and that would get interesting as the day went on, and people would get more and more drunk, and they'd start throwing cigarette butts on my on the back in the back of my booth. Like, okay, there's all kinds of funny things. But the other thing is I would put some work hanging up so people that were sitting at the bar could see it, and I'd almost always get somebody come from the bar after they got drunk, looking at my art all day, and come and buy something. So there was the double-edged sword of, they would throw cigarette butts at you, but they would also buy your work. Yeah, well, that was funny. And so I was working on my display, trying to make things that were easier to both set up and tear down, and that looked clean. And one of the things I started to do is I would see people at these shows that were doing really well, and I would start figuring out, like, what is it? And so one of the things I noticed is that the people that were doing really well at these shows had double booths, which means that they paid for two booths, and which doubles your expense right off the top. But I also saw that, like, one time I was in a festival in San Francisco, and there was some photographers there that were just killing it. I see people walking with their stuff all the time, and I walked down to look at their display, and they had these display panels that were like 9 feet tall, and they had this like monstrous ship of a display booth, and it was so crowded that you couldn't, like, if you weren't walking right in front of these booths, that you wouldn't necessarily see what was going on. But these tall displays, you could see the work over everybody's head, and then it was a double booth with a corner, so you had that whole extra time to catch people's attention with what your display was. So you had the display was more optimized for really crowded events, so that people had better opportunity to see your work no matter where they were as they walked by. And so I started buying double booths. I didn't have the money for this tent, or to get that set up. I looked into it, was like $5,000 or $6,000. It was a lot of money. So I started buying double booths anyways, and I had these two pop-up tents that I used. Um, and I started traveling farther and farther away as I went through this. I started figuring out how to make some better sales. Um, but I think I need to back up because there's something else that happened before this. So I was doing that, and then uh, going back to the work itself, I realized that the style of work that I was doing, as like there's a sort of evolution of my process here too that was going on. I was doing, what I would do is I would come up with an idea. I would do a really detailed sketch in my sketchbook, or drawing. I'd do some drawings and come up with an idea. Then I would get some models to pose for references, and then I would do a really thought out drawing from using the references as a starting point, and transfer that drawing to a painting surface, and then paint it. And all those steps were tedious, And not only that, but I look back at my original sketches in my sketchbook where I got my ideas, and those sketches had this life to them that was not present in the paintings. And I'm like, um, what do I do? It's like I wanted that energy that I had in the paintings. So what I started doing was I started a couple of paintings where I didn't start a drawing. I just drew it onto the canvas with paint, like I kind of like I do now. And then that energy started showing up into the paintings. I was creating something that was more efficient, like doing all this preparatory work and all these different things um, takes time, and so that time means you make fewer paintings, and I wanted to do more with what I wanted direct results too. Like I got tired of rendering with colored pencils on something for an hour and it barely looked different. I like the immediacy of working with oil. Just mix the paint and put it on and move on. And so I was starting to do that. Simultaneously to all that, I was looking at eBay, and I had sold some stuff on eBay like early, like in 99, 2000, but I never really did much more with it because I don't know why. I probably would have been a smart move to do that, but it didn't occur to me how important online was going to be. And anyways, I missed that boat at that point. Um, so I was looking on eBay and I started seeing some of these artists that were selling these sort of abstracted acrylic paintings, and they were selling them as triptychs in different panels, and they were selling a bunch of them, and they were selling for like 500 or $600, sometimes 1,000. And I could tell by looking at them that they were relatively easy to put together. They weren't really super complicated pieces. And I started looking at their profile and how much they were. I just started seeing, like what their sales were, and I realized that they were selling $10,000, $15,000 of art a month easy. And I kind of took the same notion I had when I saw people selling art in Venice Beach. I'm like, well, if they can do it, so can I. So I decided I was going to create a pseudonym for making sales in on eBay, and so I took the word fake art and I rearranged it so that it spelled Fear Cat, and that was going to be my pseudonym for this. And I was going to take I could get stretched canvases. Like when they went on a big sale at Dick Blick or something, you get like 70% off, and I could get a whole bunch of cheap canvas cheap, and then make a bunch of these paintings. And I went to Home Depot, and you can go to any hardware store to do this. And I got the Oops cans in the painting department, which are like colors that people mixed but decided that they didn't want. And I would just get quarts or gallons of all these different colors. I got some like foam brushes, and I kind of come up with this premise like I will make these abstract paintings with house paint on canvas, and I will not spend more than 20 minutes on any of them. That's it, and I don't care. And I took that and I started making these paintings, and I thought they would probably turn out like crap, but I thought, oh, just. But it turns out they turned out kind of cool, and turned out to be kind of fun. And then came the hassle of trying to sell them on eBay and having to set up auctions and go through all that process. And, you know, pricing and sizing and get the photos, and you have to edit the photo. And I realized that there's a whole time consuming things, to do that, which wasn't really exciting to me. But the other thing is like they weren't really selling, so I created these other eBay accounts and I started shill bidding on them to get the price to go up. And there was a couple of times where I ended up buying my own auction, but then eBay figured that out, and they put a hold on my account and gave me a talking to about that's against our terms, shill bidding. I'm like, oh, like I was the only one to ever think of doing that. I was like, it didn't even occur to me that like, okay, like, is that what I'm doing? And but the paintings I made, they because I only spent 20 minutes on them and didn't care, you end up getting really loose. And I did things I would never do in my regular paintings, and I ended up liking a lot of what I was doing. There was just this energy that you can't get unless you have a sort of not worried about making a mistake attitude to it and not trying to control it. It's like some of those paintings turned out really cool. I still have a couple of them up in my little living area here. I sold a few of them, but it was really a lot more work than I thought. And the work wasn't that, it was fun, but it wasn't that fulfilling. But one of the things that I did is I took some of these paintings that were, kind of on the thinner side, and I used those as the backgrounds for my regular paintings. I started painting like, I think one of the first ones I did was like a painting of muddy waters on a painting on a big canvas that I did that way. And then I had all that sort of really cool energy from the abstraction going on with this sort of figurative work. And that is where the sort of stylings and that's kind of how I discovered my style, I guess. I still use all these runnings. In fact, I started this painting with just some abstract oil wash on the background. And then I had this sitting around for, I don't even know how long I've had it. It's sitting in storage over here. And then when I knew I wanted to do this painting, I grabbed this canvas out. I'm like, this is going to be great for that painting. And just sometimes that's the way it works. Um, so I end up creating something that I couldn't do on purpose if I tried. Like I couldn't plan it out. So what I discovered about the way I like to work is I like to discover what I'm doing as I go through it as well. Like what was boring to me about the way I was working was there wasn't any surprises. There wasn't didn't leave any room for discovery in the painting. It just became a technical feat, and technical, just doing something as a practice of technique isn't that interesting to me. And I think that was showing up in the work. My lack of interest was showing up. I wasn't into just how detailed can you make something. What interests me is like um, what's going to happen, and then discovering new colors that mix together well, and like all these other things. You start discovering all kinds of technical things that are fun, rather than just doing a sort of repetitive process over and over and over, and get images that come out looking consistent. So the consistency started happening with having a abstracted environment with a more figurative and literal figure in it. So you had something that was representational, something that was abstracted. And the abstractions weren't something I just invented. They were kind of a natural thing. Like I make these runs and drips, and I don't really have anything to do with it. It just does what it does, and it's like the grain of wood or something, some sort of natural pattern, and that is always pleasing to the eye. It's like when I had to like paint in a background, and I had to do it with brushwork. It just didn't look good. But when I did these sort of things with it, all of a sudden it came alive. And so by doing this experiment with a pseudonym for eBay, making fake art with house paints, I kind of discovered something that turned into what my style ended up being, which was loosening up quite a bit. And yeah, that's basically it. And So at the same, so like I mentioned, I was doing paintings of fairies and mermaids and fantasy art, floating trees, and I started to understand that there were a lot of people doing similar things. Like the whole sort of art scene I was aware of was all like fantasy stuff and naked chicks and all that. And I felt like it was just you know being one amongst many that everybody was doing it, and there's a lot of people I thought were probably even better than what I was doing. And I was like, I started wanting to do something that was just completely different. Um, and so I wondered, like, well, what would be like 180 degrees turn from what I'm doing? And I'm looking at like these fancy things. I'm like, well, what if I did paintings of like bikers or something, like just ruffled looking dudes and gnarly things like that. And part of my thinking of that too was that like I was getting interested in American history of the West, and having grown up in Wyoming and all that stuff, I was looking at um, that, and I was interested in history, and I started thinking like, well, what? I never seen anybody make paintings of like the American West outlaw and lawman and stuff, and I've seen it, but I haven't seen it like it. You see Western art, and it's really sort of like pretty typical and traditional. Like it's about the West, but I've never seen anybody approach the characters really that well. Like like there's Western scenes like like the Frederick Remington and all that stuff, but it's not what I was thinking about. I was thinking like I've never seen anybody do like um, paintings of Jesse James or whatever it is. So I started reading about American outlaws and the Civil War and all that kind of stuff, and so I started approaching it from doing um, a historical dive into American history and representing these historical figures as something that are more, you know, I guess entertaining, like um, trying to take something that was really historical in nature and make it not boring. Like I think people a lot of times might think of history as being boring, and so I decided to start doing these Wild West paintings, and I started out with the painting of Wild Bill Hickok and playing, he got shot playing cards. So these were loosely based on, they weren't like literal depictions. So started out with that, and then a painting of like a sheriff called the Lawman, and did a few more paintings. And I had a friend that a musician, and he was the first, I think the first lead singer on Anthrax's first album. This guy named Neil Turbin, and met him down in Hermosa Beach, doing that art festival down there, and he'd always stop by, and he liked my art, and him and his girlfriend at the time, and but he's like this really tall, long dark hair. He likes to wear this. He was wearing a cowboy hat at the time and long leather jackets, and like he is the type of guy that would fit this. So I got him to pose, and he had a death metal band he was working with, and so I had him come over and pose for some photos, and I ended up doing the shootout painting, and Pistolier he was a model for, and I started showing up to events with these paintings, and people loved them, and I started to discover that I liked making them, and I wasn't getting tired of it, and before I knew it, I had a whole body of work that was similar in subjects and themes, subject similar in style, and so I started to really gel together um, what my shtick was, I guess, and it was American history and just the sort of uh, uh, peek into that with a sort of uh, I don't know, rock and roll flair. I would say like I like this sort of I like movement. I like this gestural flow in my paintings, and that comes from things that happen naturally in the backgrounds. And I like things to sort of be alive, like they're not posing for painting. So there's always a bunch of action or some sort of emotional quality that's going on that implies something that's more than just what the object of the painting is. So, like for instance, like this is a painting of Charles Bradley singing, but I want this to feel like someone who's um, crying into the microphone, and like I want that vibe. So more than the subject matter itself was like the style, the way I draw, the way I do all these things. They just kind of came together through all these different little circumstances, and I started to have more success, even selling to people on festivals, because I you know the audience, while it was more, like I was appealing to maybe a more specific, narrow sort of audience as far as theme, um, it it was resonating with people, like they understood it, and so I kept doing it. Yeah, so it became something that I could do, repeated sort of variations on the theme of these paintings, and I wasn't getting tired of making them, and so I knew that I was kind of onto something. And the other thing about this too is that the American history was just like there was so many things that I had never heard of, um, and there was just a ton of material to develop to go into, like things to paint about. Um, so as I was discovering this, or right before, I also um, had an experience where I had another friend on the boardwalk, and he managed to get himself one of these big, large format printers as well. And I remember he came out and he made some of his paintings as prints on canvas, and he came out to the boardwalk and he put them out on an A-frame, just kind of like almost like rugs. He didn't frame them or anything. He just put them out there, and he started selling them for like several $100 a piece, and which was pretty good money in Venice. And then I realized, like, I hadn't figured out how to make these canvas prints work, and I just kind of gave up on it a bit because I just figured, well, they don't sell here, and so I'm not going to waste a bunch of energy trying to make something that people don't want to buy, and it's too much of it's the problem if you bring down things to a venue, like when you're selling outside and you don't sell them, is that they eventually get beat up over time, and then you have not only something that is hard to sell, but then it's like beat up and doesn't look very good, and it's like a compounding injury. So you don't want to be bringing things, whatever doesn't work, you don't keep focusing on it. And at least that's what I was doing. But I saw my friend do it, and I'm like, oh, it can be done, and quite successfully. So I went back to figuring out how to make my printer work, and so I had a large format printer, and I started reading everything I could read about color profiling and how to actually use that printer for what it was designed for. Because I don't think I really got into like um, all the ways to use that professional tool as a professional tool. Like I was still using it like an amateur. Um, so I learned about all the digital color profiling and management and all that kind of stuff, so I can make the printer work better. And I finally figured out how to make the prints come out without having, the color look right, without having to do a lot of uh, painting on top of it or something to make it to bring out the colors right. And I then needed a way to present them. I didn't want to just like let them out like flapping in the wind, like my friend was doing. And so what I I wanted to stretch them like so they would look like paintings on canvas, stretched and ready to hang up. And so I went to the hardware store and I got this select pine and got a miter saw and started cutting frames to stretch the canvas around. And I took them down to Venice, and my goal was to just, all right, they look good, they're ready to hang. Um, let's see what happens. And I decided I was just going to sell them dirt cheap. Just to, I didn't want to be bringing them home with me. And so I put a price on them that I thought was as low as I could afford to sell them, and they sold. I sold them. They sold quickly, actually, and so the next week I made some more, and once again I sold quite a few of them, and and it was like all of a sudden I was doing way better in Venice. Like the sales were like doubling, if not more, every time I went out, and most of the money was being made on these canvas prints. And even though the profit margin wasn't as high as the paper prints, the the sheer amount of money that was being made, was still worth it. And they were selling quick enough that it made sense to keep doing it. Um, so I started doing these, and there was a few improvements I had to make. First of all, the inside of the pine, I was stretching them on like 1.5 inch pine, um, and the first thing that happened is that the inside edge will create a crease on your painting if there's no lip there. And so I got a router on a table and a bit that would quarter around the inside off, and that way I would have a canvas that wouldn't have an edge rubbed into the inside like a half an inch inside of all the way around the painting or the print. Um, the other thing too is that I was printing them with white borders, and then the edges of the canvas would be white, and so I started looking at in these commercial galleries what they were doing, and they had the image mirrored around the edge. So I didn't want to like take the actual painting and stretch it around the edge because then you're losing things you're changing the composition of the painting. So I just created what's called a mirror, and later found out that's called a gallery wrap. And then I had clean edges, and then I had things that didn't need to be framed. So like I'd mentioned before, one of the real drawbacks of bringing framed art at festivals and shows is that the frames get beat up if you don't sell them very quick. So you have to spend a lot of effort in keeping them nice, and it can be difficult. Um, so these didn't need, and plus, with the varnish that I was using, they were pretty durable. They didn't get beat up and scratched up. It kept them in back. I found a way to do it that was pretty effective and efficient, and they sold quick enough that they didn't have time to get beat up by dragging them around to all kinds of different venues. And eventually, you found out which ones sold quicker than others, and then the ones that don't sell, you just toss to the side. You quit bringing them around. You don't want stuff that looks like beat up old inventory sitting in your booth. Doesn't look good. And if it doesn't look good, people aren't going to be, they people will be, influenced in what they think about your work by the way you present it. Like goes back to the whole presentation is key. Like I was talking about, like I saw those booths in San Francisco. They were just like monstrosities, and but it it affects the way that people view the work, and they had high prices on their work, and it looked like $1 million, and they were charging $1 million, and nobody was asking questions. Like nobody questioned it. Um, where was I? Yeah, presentation is key to all this. Yeah, so I was making these canvas prints, and they were working, and I was bringing them to all my other venues, and they were doing well at those venues too. And it was kind of mind-boggling at first because I was going to shows, and each show was like I was doing twice the amount of sales that I would normally do. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is a fluke, But after it kept happening, I was like, oh, this is no fluke. And th- what that meant for me is that now I could start doing events and shows even farther away from home. One of the drawbacks to, like, if I wanted to go do show in Texas or Arizona is that if you don't make enough at those shows, you start losing money pretty rapidly. Not just in the booth fee, but in travel expenses and time. And there's a certain amount that you got to make to kind of just kick the can down the road. But with what I had just discovered with these canvas prints, that became something that I could think about a lot more. And so that's what I did. I started doing shows farther from home. I started going to Arizona, Texas, doing juried art events. Um, so even though the Beverly Hills show didn't repeat itself like the first experience I had, I did still believe that that was possible. So I started meeting other artists, and they were doing big numbers at these events, and so I knew that it was possible, and 'cause I saw people doing it. And the thing that the thing that I had going for me now is that I had um, work that was cohesive, that was leading into more sales, which allowed me to put more into my presentation. So you don't want to cheap out uh, on your presentation. You want to do the best you can afford to do. Um, and so I remember I went. I mentioned I'd seen these people with these huge tents, and as I started doing some of these festivals, you could tell there was a whole industry surrounding doing these outdoor events, and a lot of these vendors and artists at these shows had the same tent kind of set up. There was a company that made tents just for outdoor sales, and a lot of the artists had the pro panels. Like, there was a whole thing. Like, somebody had already figured that out, and they there was industry around it. And so I was I got I was making my own panels because I couldn't afford. There's a couple things. Getting that system was expensive. Getting some of those things set up. Also, like, I wanted to um, differentiate myself. Like, remember I made these wood frames, and I put house insulation inside of them, and then I wrapped them with fabric, and I picked like red fabric or black fabric or white fabric, something that was interesting. And they were lightweight, they were easy to get around, and they were pretty sturdy. And I could use curtain hooks in them. I could just stab it in there and use that to hang light canvases on them. So I developed my own little way of doing it, and that was working. But I knew that you know the professional looking presentations, they still look professional. The carpeted walls and all that kind of stuff, like that looks more legit. And so that's so yeah. So I was going to a show in Austin, Texas, and I was set up around. It was like right downtown and right next to the river down there, and uh, they'd been doing some construction right next to one of the bridges. Where I was set up was sort of going onto a bridge, and I was set up right against one of these construction fences. And I had a double booth, and it was like two pop up tents. Um, And on either side of me were these, fancier artist booths. The trimline canopy, the domed canopy that has a skylight in it, and steel pipes, and they're solid as a rock. And I remember being in my booth, and it got windy, and the wind was blowing right across into my booth, across the street into my booth, and blowing. And the only thing that was behind me was a construction fence, and then a big sort of ravine down into the river. And it got really windy, and it started blowing into my booth. And my booth, because it had walls all the way around it, and it had tarps that were tied to the back, it became like a parachute. And the wind came into my booth, picked the booth up, and they took the front legs of my canopy, which were weighted with concrete bricks that I'd gotten at a hardware store, and they were held there with a tie, like a tie strap, like a ratchet. So it picked they were bungeed, or maybe they were bungeed around the front of the legs, but it picked that up, and because they were heavy, they swung like a pendulum into my booth. And then when the wind subsided, the canopy came back down, but the legs, instead of going down, were pointed in. And I had to catch my whole entire canopy and hold it. And the wind was blowing, and I was just like, it's only a matter of time before I get blown off this road into the river behind me. Luckily, I didn't, but I did notice that my neighbors on either side of me, who had the fancy trim belt to withstand these kind of things, they didn't budge. It was like there wasn't even wind for them. And when I got home from that show, first thing I did was I ordered one of those canopies. I'm like, that's it. If I'm going to be doing this, um, I'm not going to do that again. That's just stupid. To what, like how much that would have set me back if I had lost all of my art and lost my display, because I didn't want to spend the money on a tent that was designed to do that better. And then I bought the display panels also, so I sunk a bunch of money into that. And now I had the ability to be also one of those artists that had the 9-foot display and a 10 by 20 foot booth on a corner. And still had to kind of suck it up and pay the fees, because the booth fees were twice. So I ended up, like, so what I had mentioned yet last week about not being afraid to invest in yourself, that's really one of the, I had to, like, kind of take my own advice there and just pony up the money to do the big booth, the double booth space. And I had to just, without knowing it was going to work, um, spend twice as much, if not 3 times as much, on what I was doing in these events, just to participate. And sometimes it paid off, sometimes it didn't. But the booth, I never regret doing that, getting that equipment. In fact, I can't think of equipment that I've purchased or invested in to do and this stuff. There's never been something I wish I hadn't explored and tried. Um, so it requires some investment into yourself. And it paid off. I started doing good at a lot of these shows, which allowed me to go to farther and farther away venues. And before I knew it, I remember I was, I think it was New Year's Day on 2008. It's a beautiful day. And I thought, man, if I went out to Venice today, I would kill it. This is before I got the big booth, by the way. This is like 2007. I thought, man, I would do really well. It was a great day. There'll be lots of tourists out. It'll be beautiful weather. And I decided to stay home and play video games instead. And that was the last day I ever considered selling my art in Venice Beach. I don't know when the last day I ever went there to sell it was, but that was the last day I thought about it. So yeah, I kind of had the attitude that like never say never. I never thought like I'm finally out of there. I'm never going back. I didn't say that. I figured I'd jinx myself. So I just kind of chalked it up as like I don't know when the last time I was there was. But what I had managed to do by doing better at these events and being able to travel across the country is I was able to find better and better events, and because I could go farther and farther away from California and be successful at these events, I could then had a lot more opportunity at my fingertips to replace the venues that didn't work as well. And it might have been just venues that I didn't want to do because like you know the festivals change too. They they can turn it, start out great, then they for too long they don't draw the same audience for some reason, and then they get different management, and then they get different vendors, and it can get better, it can get worse. So you kind of got to be aware of when things are going south. And generally, my litmus test for that was when there was more and more just people selling stuff, like especially if it was like an art show. If they started having more and more and more jewelry vendors that were just selling, just crap jewelry, that's usually a good indicator that this event was probably on its way out, as far as like the kind of audience that it would draw, like the expectations from the crowd, um, that sort of thing. But all right, well, that's about an hour today, so I'm gonna put an end to this here shortly. I've just been sort of dinking around on this painting. I don't know where I'm going with it exactly. Just trying to kind of have fun with it. Some people have mentioned the book Blood Meridian to me, and I've heard that mentioned a couple of times, and actually more than a couple of times. And I've been meaning to look into it, but I'd like everybody to know that I've got the audio book, and I started that today, and I may end up doing a series of paintings that are sort of reflective of that story. I've looked into the synopsis of it, and it seems like something that's going to be up my alley quite a bit, and so stay tuned for more for more information on that. Stay tuned. Well, yeah, stay tuned. Let's see. Yeah. All right. Until next week, y'all have fun. Stay safe, and we'll check you later.